We all pursue life based on what we were frequently asked as a child. What do you want to do when you grow up? Living up to our potential through achieving is programmed at a very young age. Deprogramming usually starts when we burn out, mostly because we've drifted away from our true purpose. This is my story. When I stumbled upon Britt Mooney, I realized the question we should be asking is, who was I born to be? Britt's book on this very topic reminded me that I was already validated. I was already loved by God, that my work didn't need to prove anything. My being comes before my doing. It's the who, not the what, that leads to true fulfillment. Fulfillment comes before achievement. Before I go any further, my search for purpose has been a spiritual journey. Since 2019, when I first burned out, I've constantly wrestled with the intersection of work, faith, health, and family, and how this all blends into how we spend our time in our hustle culture. My professional burnout revealed to me that something was wrong at a very deep level. Not only with me, but with millions who experience similar ways of burning out. My burnout birthed Own Your 5 to 9 and a new quest to help others reignite their fire. But I didn't start this initiative because I had all the answers. I wanted the answer. Every day for the last 5 years, I felt like I've been getting closer and closer to finding the answer to how we find purpose and eradicate burnout. I've found clues along the way from many experts, and I continue to share my thoughts and research, now knowing that everybody has a different story, thus a different solution to avoiding burnout. Britt Mooney's book, We Were Reborn for This, the Jesus model for living heaven on earth, was like lightning in the bottle for my quest. I felt like Britt had written a lengthy manifesto for Own Your 5 to 9. It beautifully tied in the bow where all the topics were I'm passionate about. Releasing achievements, redefining rest, redefining success, releasing stress, loving our neighbor, why family matters most, embracing health, understanding God's purpose, finding my purpose, and embracing authenticity. The day I read the last page of the book was the day I emailed Britt for a conversation, and he said yes. Britt then agreed to meet and have a conversation. And I'm happy to introduce Britt throughout this podcast today. Britt challenges traditional thinking. He challenges traditional religious views. Britt also challenges the narrative we put on the word normal, as he is uniquely passionate about matters that don't usually fit in the same sentence. Sci-fi, fantasy, craft brews, and the good news. He's written books on all three. And lastly, as a disclaimer, I realize that everybody comes from a different belief system or faith backgrounds. So this interview with Britt is not for everyone, and you're free to take a hall pass if you wish. However, for those of you who have ever wrestled with purpose, fulfillment, time management, meeting other people's expectations, or even wrestled with God, I hope that you can find soulful rest from this passionate conversation. We'll be right back with the interview. You are listening to the Work Life Eubiosis podcast with your host, Charleston Edwards. If this is your first time here, welcome. My goal is simple: to eradicate burnout and to bring harmony, purpose, and balance to this world, starting with the family. My hope is that this show and the story shared will provide encouragement and ideas that will be valuable to you on your journey to work-life freedom. So let's dive in to today's episode. All right. I've hit the record button. Britt and I have been talking for the last 30 minutes and realized we probably should have already been recording. So let's start here, Britt. First of all, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Charleston.
Could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got into ministry?
That's a great question. So a little bit about myself. I am a husband and a father, and I'm someone desperately in love with Jesus who tries to seek the kingdom first in all things. And part of what that looks like for me is I write. So I write fiction, I write nonfiction, I write marketing material on a freelance basis. And then, I'm involved in various things of that nature. And it's a little bit about me. I've been around. I've been in other countries. I've been a missionary. I've been a church planting pastor. I've done a lot. So, but it's always been a result of the answering the only call that matters, which is my life belongs to God and God alone, period. It's something that God did in my heart long ago where he really challenged me. And it, I don't know what people believe about stuff, but I mean, like, I had visions. I was working at Subway as a college student opening, and I had a vision. I mean, God took me to a place of, I was in my mind, at least, not where I was, and just challenged me. Like, what are you about? And you give your heart to the Lord. I gave my heart to the Lord at 14. I grew up in church, and I knew how to do church. I knew how to do religion. I knew all the right answers in Sunday school. I had it all put together. And I was at a Christian rock show in the 80s. That's how old I am, as a teen. And, they had the whole thing where they have the altar call or whatever, the invitation, they talk about Jesus, whatever. And I was sitting there, and we kind of grouped up with our youth leader at the time and a young adult. She was in her 20s, and God just really spoke to me. And he was like, are you in this or not? Like, because I would be one person at church and then be another person at school. And most people were and are like, this is normal. But God's not divided like that. That he's not one person here and another person there. And I mean, he might express himself as one of the Trinity, but the Trinity's one. So they're all there. It's the fullness of the Godhead was in Christ, even though he's also the Son. And you might call that a paradox, but that's just the reality. That's just spiritual reality. I can't understand it. It's just real. And so anyway, so God wanted me to have integrity, because that's the blessing. That's where peace goes. That's where it is. And so he just called me. He's like, sometimes he talks to you in your language, right? And it was kind of like a piss or get off the pot moment. Like, are you going to play religion, or are you really going to be mine? And when God speaks to you like that, I guess you could theologically say you have a choice, but I was like, I'm yours. I'm yours. I'm in. And it was after that I started growing my hair out, and I stopped dressing up for church, because I was like, this is bigger than this. It's bigger than this external stuff that some people find important. And so I was idealistic enough to think that I was always in ministry. I was taught my first ministry is to Jesus. As a priest, I was taught by my mentor through my late teens and early 20s that my first ministry is to God, to please him. So I was already in ministry, and out of that, I found my contentment in that. And I worked as a teacher, and I would just work jobs, and God led me through all sorts of things. And then God called me into more official ministry and I kind of went kicking and screaming because I don't know if it was pride or whatever, but I felt like, no, I'm good. Like I'm serving you, I'm ministering to people, but I've got like a regular job, and I mean, like, this is fine. Like, I don't believe like I need to have any sort of title or position for me to be a minister for you. But he called us, my wife and I, to Korea. So we were missionary teachers at an international Christian school in South Korea for 4 years. And he sent us there first. And then while I was there, he had us take over a ministry to the military called the Hospitality House. And again, every step is me kicking and screaming. I'm like, no, I don't need this, you know? So as far as how that's kind of how I got into ministry and church planning. Is just every step of the way, it's like, okay, God's saying, do this. And I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, I'm not looking to make a career out of this, you know, but over the years, because I'm a writer and God has given me something of a gift in that, you know, he opened the doors for me to write articles and books and stuff like that. So that's been interesting.
So I really like how you have delineated between a life of ministry versus official ministry, right? Just the way that you carry yourself through in your home, out in public, to whoever you're around, to taking a position of something more official. You talked about the kicking and screaming and the wrestling. Can you go deeper on what was that wrestling like?
So for me, it was often a challenge it's always a humbling thing to me. I think anyone who's called by God and feels like, well, that makes sense. I don't think you're doing it right. I don't see that in the Bible. Even Jesus resisted it. They're out of wine. It's not my time yet. I mean, even he resisted it. Like it wasn't going to be, you know, his brothers, you know, if you're really the Son of God, you'd go to Jerusalem. He's like, I'm not going. And then he would go later. There's this, so for me, I get comfortable, I guess. And so when God says, all right, let's go here, it feels like a radical departure. It feels like, well, you called me here. Like, why would I go anywhere else? And for me, there was also, I'm an idealist. I'm Irish and I'm an idealist. So, and I'm an independent thinker, I guess. At least I like to think I am. And so sometimes the downside of that is you can look at certain people in a judgmental way. And God told me something early on, because I was doing my thing and I was learning and doing house church and doing all this stuff. And I had a, t-shirt that said religion sucks, Jesus rules. And, I was, not that I don't believe that stuff anymore, but Jesus challenged me. He said, you can become a Pharisee about anything. And in other words, guard your heart, about judging other people, and so for me, the kicking and screaming is, I don't need this. And are you sure this is what you want me to do? And I guess in some ways I've kicked and screamed less as I've gotten older, but a lot of it was a radical departure. Like when God called me to be a high school teacher, I was like, I don't want to, that was the last thing I wanted. When I was in high school, when I was a senior in high school, I had long hair and I had this teacher, and I would wear these really radical Christian t-shirts. And my math teacher did not like it. He did not like the t-shirts. He threatened to send me home one day. Like, he was just like, he did it. I had this shirt where this guy was standing before the throne of God, and there was this verse about, you have rejected the Lord, and now you're going to hell or something. And he was like, you can't wear that at school. It has the word hell in it. I'm like, no, of course I'm argumentative because I'm Irish, and I'm like, no, it's a place. Anyway, but in my conflicts with this guy, I looked at him and I said this, which is, I'm not proud of it, but I looked at him and I said, I will never do your job. I just literally said that. So then God reveals himself to me, and he goes, you're going to be a teacher. I want you to be a teacher. And I went, no, do not want this. So those are the kind of things that, God's like, okay, now you're going to go here. And they're like, I don't want to go there. I don't want to go to Nineveh. Those people are weird. They worship fish, and they've been mean. So that's my experience. And the people of God are named after the one who wrestled with him. And I'm a firm believer that you may not have my personality, but truth is first corrective, and correction hurts, and it's uncomfortable. And I walk with a limp. And I think the real people of God that I've met also walk with limps. I think it's humbling. I think it's meant to be, but they know God. They've touched him. They've held him, and they didn't let go when other people would have. That's what it means to wrestle with God, is you hang on when other people would have let go. And so I don't know if that makes me cool or what, but because I gave up on being cool a long time ago too, but that's my story.
So you just alluded to the story of Jacob,
right?
Wrestling with an angel.
Yeah.
And you have correlated that to your own story of wrestling with your calling. My first question would be, how did you hear? How did you hear God's voice?
Great question. I would say, so when I was young, because you're in church and you hear this stuff all the time. I was young. I was definitely in elementary school. So 4th, 5th grade, something like that. And this guy gets up in front of the church. A guy I knew, a man, he had a family, young kids. And I don't remember his name, but he said, God has called me. He spoke to me, and he has called me to become a minister. And everyone congratulated him. I was so excited, the whole church thing. And I went up to him and I said, what does he sound like? And he kind of chuckled, but not in a mean way. And he tried to answer it, but he really, how do you answer that? It's not really audible. And, he tried to answer it. And I guess my first answer to that question would be, I wanted it. I wanted to hear. I didn't read stories in the Bible and think, well, that's cool. They heard him. I was like, man, I want to hear him. I want to have that sort of relationship with him. I want to know what he thinks. I want to talk to him. I've got questions. Stuff doesn't make sense. And the Bible is awesome, but people talk about this person as if you can engage with him in a real way.
Yeah.
And I think the first answer is I wanted it. And I think that's where you got to start. I mean, some people don't, I guess. I mean, God sometimes just interrupts your life and speaks to you and you weren't looking for him. That happens too. I mean, Paul wasn't looking for him and he knocks him off his horse. I mean, that's it's not a formula, but but for me, I wanted it. It was a longing that I had.
Yeah.
That when I heard these stories of people that I knew and the Bible, I wanted that. And then I would say number two, along with that, is I sought it out. I put myself in communities where other people heard the voice of God. And I think I'm not against individualism, but I think we can sometimes in our American Western individualism forget the importance of community. I don't think people realize how much we share spirituality and our gifts with people just by proximity, just by being around each other.
Yeah.
And I've seen it happen. It's happened to me. And so I was around people who heard from God and I caught it.
That's awesome.
And so those are the two main things. So, but part of that was the seeking. Like I was drawn to those people because I longed for it. I wanted to hear from God. I wanted to be like that. Of course, I didn't know what the crap I was asking for. I mean, like now that you're older and you read the Bible, and you're like, oh, I should have seen. Like the guy broke a hip. Like God broke his hip. Like this is not. Like, I know it sounds awesome you're going to hear from God, but, there are Garden of Gethsemane moments.
Yes.
And there are healings too. I mean, there's awesome moments, but this is real and it's an adventure, but, we like to read about Frodo and Aragorn, but there are some really not fun parts of that story. And it's great when it happens to them, but that's the kind of story that we're called into, where it gets dark and you got to dig deep to have hope. And so, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't trade, as much as I've kicked and screamed and wrestled and had hips broken and whatever, I wouldn't trade what God has taught me for anything. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
It's pretty powerful. And I've never heard the answer to that question, that you wanted to hear from him. That makes complete sense. And the first verse that I thought about was Matthew 7:7, ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be open.
Right.
To do any of those things, you got to want to knock.
Exactly.
You have to seek, right? So it's a heart condition. And this parallels right into something you said earlier, the kingdom. And what I've seen as a theme of your life of looking beyond religion and what we can see, but living for the kingdom, for what we can't see.
Right. Can
you describe the kingdom for us?
Yeah. What a great question. So yes and no. I will first say any attempt to describe the kingdom will fall woefully short, which is why Jesus never gave a definition of the kingdom.
Always in parables.
Right. Neither did Paul. I mean, think about Paul was well versed in Greek philosophy, and it's very Greek and Western. Which, again, I don't want to put a culture down. There's a lot that they have added. That culture has added to the world, but I was talking about somebody. I was talking about somebody the other day about how I don't think we understand how much Christianity redeemed the West. I think we talk about the West in a way that I don't think we understand. Yes, it has its own distinct culture, but if you look at the Hellenistic society before Christianity got a hold of it, it was very different. It was not compassionate. It was not. I mean, they did not believe in the equality of all people. I mean, there's a lot of things that Christianity did. But my point is not to put the Western ideas down, but the idea that we need a definition is in and of itself Western and not biblical. The writers of the New Testament did not feel the kingdom needed a definition. What it needed was a people to live it out. And so, and people who are a part of the kingdom and then would look, that's the whole point of Jesus. The whole point of Jesus was, I've come from the kingdom. I'm here to declare the kingdom. And I will declare it by my words and my actions together. And then I will disciple other people to declare and live out the kingdom of God as a people. So we cannot describe the kingdom without a people to point to. And this is even Israel. That was the purpose of Israel. The purpose of Israel was, if you want to know that there is a heaven and a paradise that you long for, because we all long for it. I don't care if you're an atheist. I don't care who you are. You long for a world where babies don't die.
Yeah.
Where children aren't trafficked for sex. You long for that world. You want that world. You vote for that world to some degree. It might be misguided in one way or the other, but that's what you're doing. You might be doing it in your own strength. It might be worldly philosophy, but there's that longing within you. You know, going back to C.S. Lewis, like, if we have no evidence that a perfect world exists, why would we want one? Like, if we just evolved out of the muck, why would we want a world that we've never experienced? Like, if I want, you probably know Mere Christianity, right? Like, so it's one of my, he's like, if I want sex, I can get sex. If I want food, I can get food. I can get this stuff. Like, but where's the perfect world that I long for? Where is that? And so with Israel, God wanted a group of people to live set apart for a purpose. That's what holy means. But what they were doing is they were manifesting to some degree an eternal kingdom, an eternal reality. So if I'm going to give a definition, it would be life as God created it to be. Another definition I like of the kingdom is the realm in which God rules and reigns.
I like that.
Because they both of those give a taste of what the kingdom is. However, those definitions are by themselves might be good, or I like them. However, I cannot express the kingdom with a definition. I have to do it by story. And by story, that means how I live is a story. So I was talking about this morning. So I was listening to a podcast the other day, and I'll say his name, Jordan Peterson. I like Jordan Peterson. I think Jordan Peterson is very interesting. But he frustrated me. He frustrates me because he won't answer this question. Because Richard Dawkins was just point blank asking him, do you believe Jesus was born of a virgin? Do you believe that's a fact? And so Jordan Peterson won't answer the question. And I know why, because it's not really the right question. But it is an important one, because Paul and Peter and Matthew and Luke, these guys would say absolutely that happened.
Right.
And here's why we don't say it, is because then people will go, well, if you believe a man actually rose from the dead, then I'm going to dismiss you. How could you believe such a ridiculous thing that a woman who was a virgin had a baby, or God existed in human form, or all of these things? And I get where Jordan is coming from, because he believes the story, the meaning of the story, is greater than the story. That's true. Even biblically, that's true. But God gets involved in, this is from Genesis to Revelation, he gets involved in real places and real times with real people, and then he does impossible things there that sound like myth, but really did happen.
Right.
And those things sound like myth because when God gets involved, he infuses meaning into the event. And the meaning, in other words, yes, a woman was a virgin and became pregnant and gave birth, but there's an eternal amount of depth of meaning to that event. So that's what makes it sound like a myth. But we believe this lie in modern education, that because something sounds like a myth, it is therefore made up. Somebody made it up. And sometimes people do.
Right.
Most cultures do. But that's not true about God. But here's the kicker. But here's where we're going with, how do I describe the kingdom?
Yep.
Here's the bridge that a lot of people don't get. We overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony, and we do not love our lives even unto death. What does that mean? What that means is, when somebody goes, how can you believe something so ridiculous as a woman being a virgin giving birth to a baby, or someone dying on a cross and rising again 3 days later and ascending into heaven, like all these supernatural, how do you believe that? And you say, I laid hands on somebody when they were sick and they recovered. In other words, I've seen it, I've lived it, and I'm living it now. Now, that doesn't mean every day is going to be like you're healing people and raising people from the dead, but what that means is you need to have a story that points back, because the story's still happening. And we're in it. We're in the story.
Yeah.
Revelation hasn't happened yet. We're still in it. And miracles still happen. And God still speaks, and God still directs. And when I say, look, I had the perfect job, I loved my job, my wife and I were rocking it as young people. We talked about going overseas and teaching for the experience. We were going to go to Germany and live like cool Europeans. But God interrupted our life and said, no, you're going to go to a land where you're too tall. I'm 6'4", by the way, where you're too tall and you don't like the food and you don't speak the language. But I'm going to be with you.
Amen.
And so we went. And it is not going to make sense to people.
Yeah.
The stories of God aren't going to make sense. That's the whole point.
Yeah.
Is that they're not going to make sense to people. It's going to make people go, how could that happen? But when you have a story, people can't argue with the story. Now they can reject it. They can say, I don't know if that really happened to you, or maybe you were deluded, or you were, you're on drugs, or you had too much pizza the night before, or something like they can say a lot. They can try to explain it away.
Yep.
But when you say, no, I'm telling you, we were about to go on a mission trip, and there was a woman who had hurt her knee, And she was supposed to leave with us the next morning, and she couldn't walk. And I was there when my wife just reached over and touched her knee and said, "Be healed in Jesus' name." And it was that simple. We didn't sacrifice a goat. We didn't, we didn't run around and make God love us somehow. Like we were on mission. And we said, "God, we need this." And he did it. Does that mean he's answered every prayer that way? No, but I've seen it happen multiple times in my life. I've seen God do impossible things in my life. And if you want, how do I know that's one part of it. The other part of it is I know this happened because the same guy who rose from the dead talks to me today. Those are the two answers. And so how do we describe the kingdom is we live it in community as a set apart people, and we tell the stories.
Yeah.
And you can tell parable stories. I believe Narnia. I mean, there's all sorts of stories that people they don't mean for it to. I think Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is a picture of the kingdom of God. Because I was literally sitting there watching it for probably the 100th time or 1,000th time. This is about 15 years ago. And God's like, "This is the kingdom," and starts showing me scene by scene. I'm like, Roald Dahl, I think, was an atheist. He didn't mean for this but story does something to us. It takes us to a place in our mind and in our heart. I can go all about that. So we tell stories, fictional. We don't lie to people. Jesus wasn't lying to people when he said they knew he was telling parables. There was a woman who lost a coin, right? I mean, they knew he wasn't talking about a real woman,
Right.
But the truth within was real. And so we tell stories and we live a story that describes that when people look at us, they go, "There's something else."
Yeah.
Something else exists. So that's a long answer to, can I describe the kingdom, or can I give a definition of the kingdom? So yes, but I think it's an ongoing thing for me. And that's why I have my podcast, is because I believe the kingdom of God it infuses every part of our life and transforms every part of our life. And so how do we have conversations about people who have disabilities? And like, there's some amazing podcasts that I've done, episodes where I've talked about what does it look like for this, in light of the kingdom, God's rule and reign. How does it transform life into something beautiful and representative of another world? How does that happen in these different topics and in these different things? And so it's taught me a whole lot, and I'm still learning. So
we all are.
Yeah, man.
We all are. It's fascinating where you have pointed back to story. And in stories, there's usually a transformation, right?
Yes.
And your story is full of transformation, and it's as you said, a word of testimony.
Right.
There are a lot of people out there longing for transformation, for purpose, to hear from God. And you wrote a whole book about this, and it's why you're here. It's why we're having this conversation. The book is called "We Were Reborn for This," the Jesus model for living heaven on earth. And in the book, you gave two words that people long for: intimacy and purpose.
That's right.
Right. So, if I'm sitting here listening to this and I haven't had that transformative moment in my life, I'm going to say, "Hey, Britt, how do I find intimacy in this world and purpose? Where's that transformation for me?"
Wow. That's a great question. I would say first, you have to be humble about seeking it out. You have to be willing to be corrected. But to me, that finding of intimacy and purpose is only available as far as the real satisfaction of what it is, of those things, what those things mean. It only happens through the person of Jesus. It only happens through engaging with who Jesus is. And so, and the only way to truly engage with him is if he reveals himself to you. Because, God's ways are higher than our ways. He's, as creator and creation, we can be made in his image, but the ways, and as now, especially, under quote unquote the fall, all that theology, we are so far removed from his ways of thinking. In fact, you could argue our ways of thinking are actually opposed to his ways of thinking and feeling and doing, that we cannot, he has to reveal himself to us. That's again,
Yeah.
God showed this in story by sending his son. He's like, you can't get to me if you try.
Yeah.
That's the whole Tower of Babel story, right? You couldn't get to me if you tried.
Yeah.
But I'll come to you. So it's seeking an engagement and the revelation of God, and for God to reveal himself to you, understanding that he wants to reveal himself to you more than you want it. He wants it more than you do.
Yeah.
He didn't send his son to die and rise from the dead and go through all that pain and all that. He didn't do that. He did that out of love. He didn't do it out of obligation. He didn't do it for he loved the world so much.
Yes.
That he would do that. And so you have to engage, and some of the disciplines that you could do that with is to engage with people who are on that journey already.
Yeah.
And ask them questions and have dialogues. And sometimes that can be difficult to find. I get it. But also, there's scripture and there's prayer. But again, the desire has to be for him to reveal himself to you, because that's the core of any real transformation. The core of any real transformation is that you have engaged with God, and you will find him when you seek him with your whole heart. And you say, okay, God, I'm willing. I just, and God so honors a step. As far as he is, in some ways, he's really as close as a step.
Yeah.
He's not far from anyone. The most sinful, horrible, awful person. I'm telling you, if this is going to be wild, but Hitler was only a step away from transformation. Now, could he have remained Hitler? No. I mean, he would have had a lot of stuff to change and a lot of stuff to a lot of consequences in this world to go through.
Yep.
But he could have changed. Like there's nobody that far gone, because they thought Paul was that gone. What do you mean, Paul? What do you mean Saul is now a believer? That's impossible. And it took Barnabas to go, wait a minute, guys. Like, let's, And so, yeah. So there's a calling out and a crying out to God for him to reveal himself to you, knowing that he actually wants it. You don't have to convince him. You don't have to be good enough. You can't be. He wants to. Now, it might take some time. Now, I remember there was a young woman who was coming to our house church. This is years ago. And she had grown up in church. And, I think she'd even gone on some mission trips and stuff. She and her husband started coming to our church, our house church. And she said, we started talking, because we talked a lot. As you can tell, I talk a lot about hearing the voice of God. Because it's central to me. My sheep know me, my sheep hear my voice. Like we don't get the Bible if they didn't hear from God. I'm sorry. We just, I get it. It can be in their language and their culture and their style and all that. There's different genres, but it's God breathed. If he doesn't talk to us, then the Bible is untrue. The Bible can't have that role, Anyway, so I was talking a lot about, I talked a lot about hearing the voice of God. And she said to me one night, she said, I've never heard the voice of God. I've never heard his voice. And my answer to people like that is usually twofold. I said, number one, I don't know if that's true. You may have heard and didn't know you did. I said, but number two, hang out with us enough and you will. Just stick around. Just hold on. Wrestle with it. You will. It will happen. I guarantee it. I'm not going to say if you hold on to Jesus, he'll give you the job of your dreams, but I can guarantee you, if you cling to him and you seek him out, he will talk to you. You may not like what he says because he might tell you to go back to Egypt, where you were running from. But I guarantee you, my testimony is it'll be worth it. Whatever he tells you to do, it's worth it, because he'll be with you, and he's enough.
I'm going to piggyback off what you just said. God may ask you to go back to Egypt. Well, I'm in the space of helping individuals that have been burned out.
Right.
Some individuals are in toxic workplaces. And, it's not typically my first piece of advice to stay where you're at when things are bad. However, if we are truly following Jesus, there's a different posture in the midst of trials and tribulations, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, that when we are reborn for this, it's more of a heart condition. It's more of a posture. It's
so good.
Reclothing of our nature for whatever situation we are in.
Yeah, that's so good, man. Jesus was not bound to do anything his father told him to do. He wasn't stuck. He wasn't obligated. Just because it's bad, that doesn't mean you're supposed to stay in it. But God gives us wisdom. That's James 1. If anyone lacks wisdom, ask God. He is generous and will give it to anybody. And with that, with the voice of God, you can either stay in a situation and actually know you were sent there. Now it has a purpose and meaning. Or God can say, run. What the heck are you doing? Yes, get out.
Yes.
It's time to punch out. This is not for you. I mean, and there's an infinite amount of possibilities in between. Right? But either way, now there's purpose in whatever you're doing. Now you're in it, you're sent in it, or through it, or out of it, or whatever it is. Now you're sent. But God so loved the world that he sent. Jesus, the Spirit of God, is a sent spirit. And and there was a man called John sent from God. He prepared, again, this is getting deep, but the one who prepared for the sent Son of God was also sent from God. I don't know if that makes sense to people, but if we're going to introduce people to Jesus, the sent one, we have to be sent from God. That's the only way it's going to make sense in the end. I mean, that's the only way it's really going to happen. And so we, and like I said before, we all have our Gethsemane moments. And one of the most comforting passages to me over the last 20 years has been when Jesus didn't want to do what his Father wanted him to do. Jesus had a will separate from his Father that he had to submit willingly, and he had to choose it. Jesus said, "No one takes my life from me, I give it."
Yeah.
And that's the power of being reborn for this. When you're reborn from heaven, when you're reborn of the Spirit, they can't take your life from you.
Yeah.
Because your life originated outside of this world. If you're born again by the Spirit, then your life now has originated. You have died, and now your life has originated, the life that Christ, as Paul says, "For I have died and yet I live." It's not me, it's Christ who lives through me. So that means you can't kill the resurrection and the life. That's who Jesus says he is. You can't kill that. So they can't take that from you, but you can lay it down as he did, but you don't lay it down of your own wisdom. You lay it down with his guidance. And again, like, God might be saying, it's time to go. Like, it's time to go somewhere else. And that's sometimes not fun either, right? Because we get comfortable in our situations. But that Gethsemane moment, which, by the way, redeemed another garden moment with Adam, where he submitted to his Father's will. He submitted his will to his Father's will, which is what Adam should have done. Adam should have said, "I know it might sound like God's trying to keep something from me, but he said, don't eat of this tree.
Yep.
And I'm going to submit to his word because he alone is righteous. I don't get to take up my own righteousness and the knowledge of good and evil. That's not my job." And that's what Jesus said. Jesus said, "I only do what I see the Father do. I only say what I hear him say." And he submitted every moment. And in so doing, fulfilled all the prophecies, did all the things he was supposed to do. And so my point is that's why hearing the voice of God is so crucial to me. Jesus had the revelation of his Father constantly that guided him in every moment. And so then he had that discipline. So then when he was faced with something he really didn't want to do, and when you realize what he was going to go through, no one would. Like, you would have to be twisted in your brain to be like, okay, this sounds fun. Like, no. But God loved him and didn't judge him for it wasn't a sin to have a will, but he submitted it. But he got the revelation. Is this really what you want me to do? Okay, then I'll do it. And that's my point, is that you can't make assumptions either way. That's why you need don't lean upon your own understanding, right? You put to death the deeds of the flesh by the Spirit. If I can't do it on my own. And it sounded like I was just repeating myself over and over in that book, but I just kept having it. Like, this is all I know. This is all I know. This is what the New Testament teaches me, is I have to live moment by moment in his presence, hear from him, and walk with him. That's what the Bible teaches me. And it's that simple and it's that difficult. But then, when God says, no, you got to deal with this. Now okay, well, he'll be with me when I deal with this. He'll be with me through it.
It's a perfect segue into a part of your book, which I found fascinating, where you talk about rest. And it alludes to Matthew 11. Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. And you just said it. You can't do it on your own, right? And I believe that was the whole point of what Jesus was saying there, of flipping rest on its head.
Good.
We live in a burnout society, right?
Yeah.
And I would be the first to say, just based off this conversation, is because we're burning out because we're disconnected to our true purpose.
Yes.
Right. And we've neglected, from what you said, just being in communion with Jesus, listening for his voice, seeking him. So I would love for you to go deeper into, am I correct on this assumption of being disconnected from purpose, sort of being connecting the dot to the burnout epidemic that we're in, and two, going deeper on what Jesus said, what Jesus meant when he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest."
Yeah, man, that's so great. That's a great question. So to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier, this kind of ties in. The intimacy part comes first, because here's what Jesus does. We are created for purpose, but we don't know our purpose until we know him. Okay, we just can't. We can't know it. But you were saved by grace through faith and not of yourselves, lest any man should boast. But you were created for good works that were prepared beforehand for you to do. But you don't know what those things are. I didn't know I was supposed to go to Korea. That was not in my mindset. I was not thinking about going to Korea. I was not thinking about planting churches. I was not all the stuff that I've done. Not all, but a lot of the stuff that I've done, I didn't know I was going to. I mean, that wasn't in my plan. But man makes his plan, but his steps are ordered by the Lord. So my point is, you will know your purpose through the person, through that intimacy. And so I absolutely agree that we are in a burnout culture, and it doesn't matter how much time we take off. We are dealing with more and more anxiety and fear. And men, I'm older than you, but men my age and maybe your age, the number one cause of death is suicide. That's a fact. If, for Richard Dawkins or whoever wants to know facts, that's a fact. Now, what does that mean? That means they've lost something. They've lost hope. That's a hopeless act.
Yeah.
We can discuss whether it's a sin or not, but why don't we discuss how do we give people hope?
Yeah.
And hope is in purpose. And you can't have the purpose without the intimacy. And men are lonely. They higher and higher, it's talking about men in their 40s and 50s, higher and higher rates of them self-proclaiming loneliness every year. So what's going on? We take more vacations than ever. We get more. I mean, every job gives more time off than ever. Like we can have free healthcare. All of this stuff, I'm not against any of it. I'm just saying, like, all of it is a mentality that I have to earn or achieve my rest.
Yeah.
And that is a lie. Because the first day Adam and Eve knew was rest. Now, they had a purpose and they knew God. But the first thing, when Adam and Eve woke up in the garden, the garden was already done. And God rested. I don't think God rested for God. God rested for them. That's my own interpretation of that. But I think he wanted them to see, if this isn't on, you have to work from rest, not to get to it. The curse The curse flipped it. The curse said, now in order for you to eat and live, and even that's temporary because you're just going to die anyway. But the curse says now now you're going to have to till the soil. They went from picking fruit, like that was the most work they did. No, but they went from picking fruit and to having to dig and hard work in order to just live another day. And that's the curse. That's the hopeless existence. Now, I'm not saying we don't work for a living, but what I'm saying is it's the kingdom mentality flips it for us again. Because God didn't want the curse for us. He didn't create us to have the curse. He created us to live from rest in our purpose, doing what we were supposed to be doing, but from a place of rest. And so therefore, the kingdom, the gospel of the kingdom brings us back to that. It brings us back to me waking up with his mercies already being new every morning. It means I have nothing to prove today. I'm already a son. I'm already loved. I already have peace. I already have rest. I already have righteousness. I can't earn my own righteousness. I have all of this stuff. I just have to now enter into it and rest in his work. And that's going back now to the verse from Matthew. Because I'm telling you, there are people who take a lot of vacations and they they're still weary and heavy laden.
Yeah.
And he's saying, now if you take up my yoke, I'll give you rest. Now that seems like a paradox. That seems ironic. What do you mean? I'm taking up a yoke and I'll have rest. But see, he's the one, it's his yoke. In other words, like you're a team, right, of oxen or horses, and he's the other one.
That's right.
He's the other one.
Yep.
So it's not like you're not moving and not doing, but where are you doing? What are you doing it from? And that's what religion does. Religion is of the curse. Religion, in the negative sense, religion tries to get us to earn this thing or prove this thing or whatever. And it's already done. The work is finished. When Jesus says it is finished, how finished is finished? It's done. It's a done work. His resurrection, he died and resurrected. I think Revelation, right? It says before the foundation of the world.
Yeah.
So before there was a history, the event that happened in history actually had happened in eternity already. It was just manifested. So whatever God calls us to do has, are you ready? It's already been done. Whatever God calls me to do, it's already done.
Wow.
It's already finished. I just have to step into it. And the consequences are his to deal with. It might hurt me. I mean, it has. But I have the ultimate promise that he will work all things for good if I love him and I'm called according to his purpose. God doesn't promise all things are going to work out for good for every person. It's for those who love him, intimacy, and called according to his purpose. When you're in that with him, it's hard and it's an adventure and it's a lot of times not what you would choose, but God chooses for us knowing the end, knowing what it accomplishes in and through us and what the rewards that it's going to give us.
If it's already been done, that should flip achievement and success on its head. Right?
Yes, so good.
So how do we wrestle with ambition? Right? Like we We want to have purpose. We want to achieve whatever we put our efforts towards, whether if it's owning our own business or running a church or just at your employer. Like, how do you wrestle with ambition the right way?
That is an amazing question. All right, so I'm going to go back to Jacob again. And this is something that God's shown me recently. I'm not like within the last year. So why was Jacob wrestling with God? Because his children were behind him. Because his wives were behind him. It wasn't for himself. It wasn't so he could have the promise. It was because there was a man who had promised to kill him the next time he saw him. And Esau was capable of great violence. He was the strong one, right? He was the manly one. And so an angel shows up and Jacob sees an opportunity. He knows my only hope of surviving whatever Esau's going to bring to me is God. But and again, he was a little shrewd about it. He sent some of his kids and wives over here. Like he was like, okay, if he'll only kill half of them if he does get to them, right? Maybe the other ones can run. Like, I mean, he literally thought he was headed towards death. So my point is, I think a realignment of what true ambition is first in order. Seek first the kingdom. Seek first serving others. Seek first the things that will last. And then, and to be clear, I don't think there's any problem with learning things, becoming excellent at skills. There's nothing wrong with those things. They can be very godly, right? It's in the New Testament, like whatever you do it with excellence, do it, but do it as unto the Lord, right? Again, this is a different mentality. It's a different idea of achievement and ambition. And God told me something, and I didn't know it was in the Bible when he said it to me. I was feeling frustrated about where I was in life. And God said, your gift will make a way for you. You don't have to make a way for your gift. Your gift will make a way for you. Just serve where you are. Be excellent where you are. And I'll make a way. And so I did. And he did. And then later I read it in Proverbs. I'm like, hey, God said that to me. So I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting good things in life. There's nothing wrong with, in fact, I think there's a godly element to wanting to be excellent and learning skills and knowing there's wisdom in preparing today for what God might do for you tomorrow. I think there's wisdom in that.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to tell people to just sit around. I mean, I would not be a good writer if I am. I would not be a good writer if I just let the words come to me. Like I've worked at it a lot, and has God opened different doors? I mean, he's opened different doors I never even thought of. Like I said, it's all the time. He does this stuff. So, but our first ambition has to be the kingdom, because that's the only thing that lasts. And our second ambition has to be to serve others. So unto the Lord, but also to serve others. And then and then develop who we are. Again, Joseph could have hated God for being in prison and a slave. And God gave him a vision, or dream. You're going to, your parents and brothers are going to serve you. They're going to bow down to you. It's like, of course, I don't know if I would have shared that. But he used those opportunities to strengthen his own character.
Yeah.
So that when it came time for him to step into what God had prepared for him, he was prepared. I don't know if all that makes sense. I don't know how much that answers your question. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting good things, with wanting success, with wanting whatever. But I think to ground our hearts, we have to, our main goal has to be to please God, do what we do unto him as unto him, and seek to bless others. Yeah. And I think that God will prove himself strong, and we will see his goodness in the land of the living. I'm not going to define what that is, but we will see it.
Well, this is a perfect place for one of my last questions, because you summarize how the scripture summarizes the law, right? Love God and love others.
Good.
And in your book, one of my favorite parts was how you say, how to love thy neighbor. And also in the very end, you talk about the misfits, right? So he gave an illustration of the Good Samaritan, and an illustration of just what it meant to really love your neighbor there, of the first two religious men passed by this beaten up man, but then a third person who was from a different background, different culture, a hated culture, took this man, took out of his busy schedule, and cared for and paid for this person to get well, right? And it was a perfect illustration. And then I'm going to compact a second question into this. You also speak to, social justice, racial tensions, political divides, those that are oppressed, poverty. You give all these illustrations throughout the book, and bringing it back to what I feel like is what you said at the very beginning. How do we live out the kingdom? And it's in love, right? That's the whole purpose of this book, and for how you're living out your life right now. We are reborn for this. The Jesus model is love.
Yes.
Right? So I would love for you to give advice on the steps we can take to shed the facades, right? You said in part of your story transformation, that you were one person over here and then one person over here, and Jesus got a hold of you. It's like, be authentic, right?
Yeah.
And not just that. Once you got that authenticity and the intimacy, then there was a purpose that you've continued to live out. So how can we embrace our authenticity while also embracing the beautiful awkwardness and unique quirks of our neighbor? How can we truly love our neighbor?
Wow. It's a powerful question. You already talked about some of it. I love to point to, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars, because I'm a nerd, but sometimes you just can't do better than the original. There's just so much depth to some of those parables, all of the parables. It's just like, he was saying some amazing things. But the love of God and love of the neighbor is interconnected. Jesus was asked, for one law. Give the greatest commandment. Just give us the and again, they were seeking to, as usual, they're trying to trap him or something. Because if he said, keep the Sabbath, they're like, oh, well, what about, they would, so you think it's okay to kill people? Politicians do the same thing now. It's like he said this, that means he doesn't care about children or whatever, and so he said, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, to love God with everything. And the second is just like it, is to love your neighbor as yourself. So, again, how much time do you got? So, God's love was not meant to stay with us. God's love is meant to go out. His love goes out. So, God's love wasn't meant to stay with us. So, it's in 1 John, and it's a statement that I once read. See, I ask God a lot of questions because I'm like, okay, you're gonna have to explain this to me. So in 1 John, it says, 1 John says, by doing so, you perfect his love. How do I perfect God's love? I thought God's love was already perfect, but the word perfect is probably better translated as complete. You complete, you finish God's love by loving others. And God's perfect love, completed love, casts out fear. So when you stand before God, if God's love has been completed by going through you, then you will have no fear of the judgment. That's what that word, that people misquote that verse all the time. It doesn't mean since God loved me perfectly, I don't have to fear the judgment. John, the Apostle John is saying, if you have allowed his love to go through you to others, you will have no fear of the judgment. You can stand before him complete. So Jesus had to give two because it can't just be I love God. Because that is an incomplete understanding of God's love. It has to go through me. I have to live it out. And by loving others, you can get into the sheep and the goats, you saw me like this and you didn't help me, Lord. And did we ever see, like, if it's that sort of idea, like if it's real, it has to be manifest through us, or else it's not real. It's not complete. It's an incomplete. It's not a saving love. So how do we love our neighbor? Is to first love God and then understand that God's love isn't meant for me alone. That his infinite love cannot be contained in my life. It's infinite. It's boundless. It's abundant. It's too much for me. I have to share it. It's like the lepers, right? I mean, that's one of my favorite stories of the Old Testament. The lepers who, God, I think it's the Assyrians. God ran off the Assyrians or whoever, the angels, ran off the Assyrians, and they left all this treasure. And the lepers who were exiles, find it, and they get drunk and they're whatever. They're having a party and they're like, "Now this is wrong." That it's too much for us. We have to. And so you have to first understand God's love to you is too much for you to just keep to yourself. And then you have to share it with others. And you asked about, I love the idea about the quirkiness of others. So first of all, when you understand God's love towards you, and I understand God's love towards me, I'm not finished yet.
Yeah.
I'm in process. And all too often we think we got to fix people. And we think we don't understand where they are in their process. And we can only understand that from God. And so how do you deal with the quirks? You have to realize I'm not a finished work, neither are they. And I can't expect them to be.
Right.
Jesus didn't.
Yeah.
On the one hand, he goes, oh, blessed are you, Simon, for man hasn't revealed this to you, but my Father showed you the core truth of reality, that I'm the Son of God. You didn't get this from anybody. You got it from revelation. That's amazing. Good job. Although I don't know why he did a good job. But 2 seconds later, he goes, depart from me, Satan. But he doesn't kick him out of the group.
Right.
Like, hey, he's a person in process. You're going to deny me, Peter. No, I'm going to die for you. No. You're actually going to deny me 3 times. But the next, there's no chapter break. The next verse is, but don't worry about it. You love me. You believe in me. You'll be okay. Like, so sometimes we got to be okay with the mess.
Yeah.
You have kids.
Yes.
And I have kids. And my kids only learn to eat and feed themselves if they made a mess. And you just got to be okay with the mess with people. You got to be okay with getting in the mess with people and realizing it's going to be a mess. And again, sometimes you got to address some things, but sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just, as I think it's what it was, Corinthians or something, sometimes you just pray for people.
Yeah.
God help them. And because you got to help me. I'm a mess sometimes.
That's right.
Right. And I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I got.
We have a philosophy in our house called connect before correct.
Ooh.
Right.
I like that.
And it speaks to what you just said, right? It's how can we authentically and unconditionally love? It's instead of going in to correct, unless it's a safety issue, connect, right? Truly love, embrace the person for where they are at in their journey, and let God do the rest.
Yeah. Well, and another great example from the Bible is in 1 Corinthians, where they were messed up, man. That church was like, most of us would consider them not a Christian church for all the stuff they were doing. But Paul calls them to Christ. He calls them to their identity. And don't just correct people's behavior, because he corrected their behavior too. But more than behavior, correct people to their identity. This isn't who you are. That's a beautiful thing about Abigail's story with David, when he was about to kill her husband and kill all the people in her household. And she shows up, and her basic argument to him is, this isn't who you are. Don't do this. Not because it's wrong, but because it's not who you are. It's not your identity. And David said, you just saved some lives here. And he fell in love with her in that moment. Like, you can see it in the Bible. He's like, this woman is amazing. And he didn't fall in love with her beauty, although she probably was. He fell in love with that heart.
Yeah.
That called him. And that's what men need. That's what women need. That's what people need, is when we get involved in their mess, we don't, it's like, it's less to just deal with behavior. You got to call people to that identity. And that's where you're connecting. This is who you are.
Yeah.
I know you. And you can't say that to people you don't know. You can't call that out in people that you don't know. But with my children, right, with people that I know and I have relationship with, I can say, man, I see this in you. I see this amazing God thing in you. Let me call that out. And 99 times out of 100, the behavior will be corrected. You have to deal with it.
That's awesome.
So I love that. Connect before correct. I love that. Yeah. That's good.
Britt, I feel like I've been ministered to multiple times over the last hour or so, and I appreciate just your gifts, your following, your intimacy with Christ that is flowing through you, the love that you're giving back just in this conversation and to anyone that's listening. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I have so appreciated getting to know you. You and I talk on the phone, and so I've well, it's always great when someone says, I love your book. So, I mean, obviously I'm going to love you. But I've really appreciated you as well. So, I'm sitting here thinking, man, what are some ways we can do some content together in the future? But either way, man, you're a blessing. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Well, let's definitely keep in touch. How can people follow you? Where can they best
that's a great
find your books, or are you on social? What's your website?
Yeah, so We Were Reborn for this is on Amazon, and it's out there other places. I've done the audiobook for We Were Reborn for this. So if you like, I've just done that. So you just go on Amazon, look for We Were Reborn for this, and people can look for Kingdom Over Coffee on pretty much anywhere you get, all the major places you get podcasts. And there's some great conversations. God has blessed me with some great people to talk to and dialogue with about the things of the kingdom. So those are the two main things.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I appreciate you again. Thank you for being on today's podcast.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Work-Life Eubiosis podcast, part of the Work-Life resources created by Own Your 5 to 9. I hope that you have found encouragement and a few ideas to strengthen your journey to purpose, freedom, and balance. Have you overcome burnout and found a new way of life? Millions around the globe are still at the risk of burnout and losing it all. And your story may be the one that sparks not only a dream, but action. Visit ownyour5to9.com for more information and submit your story. While you're there, join the Work-Life Eubiosis newsletter and receive additional resources weekly right to your inbox. If you enjoy this podcast, take time to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Share it with a friend or loved one. Remember, the most important organization in the world is the family. Let's do our part to strengthen it. Thank you for listening.